What if I told you that the way you were taught in school didn't just fail to unlock your potential? It may have actually trained your brain to stop thinking. That sounds extreme, but it's exactly the kind of warning that Richard Feynman hinted at when he talked about education. Not in a dramatic, conspiracy-type way, but in a quiet, unsettling realization that many people leave school knowing more facts, but understanding less about how the world really works. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Imagine a simple question. Why does the sky look blue? Most people can answer that. They'll say something about light scattering, maybe even mention molecules in the air. It sounds smart. It sounds complete. But if you ask them to go one level deeper, why does scattering make blue light dominate? Suddenly things get fuzzy. Push a little further, and the explanation collapses. Feynman called this the illusion of knowledge. You think you understand something because you've learned the words, but the words are just labels, not understanding. And here's the part that hits hard. School often rewards this illusion. From an early age, you're trained to memorize definitions, formulas, dates, diagrams. You're given a question, and somewhere in your memory there's a matching answer. If you can retrieve it fast enough, you're smart. If you can't, you're behind. But real thinking is messy. It's slow. It involves doubt, confusion, and asking questions that don't have clear answers. And that kind of thinking doesn't fit neatly into multiple choice tests. So over time, something subtle happens. You stop asking why and start asking what's the answer. And that shift is where the damage begins. Feynman once shared a story about a student who knew the name of a bird in multiple languages. English, Latin, maybe even Japanese. The student could recite them perfectly. But when asked how the bird actually behaves, how it flies, how it survives, what makes it unique, the student had no idea. And Feynman's point was simple but powerful. Knowing the name of something is not the same as understanding it. Now think about your own education. How many things did you memorize just to pass a test? And how many of those things can you actually explain today in a way that makes sense? Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you're trying to explain electricity to someone who has never heard of it. No technical terms, no jargon, just pure understanding. Could you do it? Most people would struggle. Not because they're not intelligent, but because they were never trained to build understanding from the ground up. They were trained to recognize patterns and repeat answers. Feynman had a different approach. Whenever he learned something new, he would try to explain it as if he were teaching it to a child. If he couldn't simplify it, he assumed he didn't truly understand it. And that's a brutal test, because it forces you to confront the gaps in your knowledge. It strips away the fancy words and exposes what's really there or what isn't. Let's take something simple. Why does an object fall when you drop it? The quick answer is gravity. But that's just a label. It's like saying it falls because falling happens. It doesn't explain anything. So you dig deeper. You might say, mass bends space, and objects follow that curvature. That sounds more advanced, more scientific. But if you pause for a second, do you actually understand what it means for space to bend? Can you picture it? Can you explain it without using the same words again? This is where most people hit a wall. And this is exactly what Feynman was pointing out. Education often gives you increasingly complex labels, but it doesn't always give you the tools to question those labels. Instead of encouraging curiosity, it quietly replaces it with certainty. You stop exploring ideas and start defending answers. And the scary part is, this doesn't just affect science. It affects how you think about everything. When you're used to memorizing instead of understanding, you become more likely to accept things at face value. You hear a confident explanation, and it feels true, even if it's not. But when you train yourself to think like Feynman, something changes. You start asking uncomfortable over time. It cools down. Why? You might say heat escapes into the air. Again, that's not wrong, but it's incomplete. What does it actually mean for heat to escape? What's moving? Why does it move that way? If you follow that chain of questions, you eventually reach the microscopic world molecules, vibrating, colliding, transferring energy. and suddenly the simple act of cooling coffee becomes a window into the deeper structure of reality. That's what real understanding feels like. It's not just knowing the answer, it's seeing how the answer connects to everything else. But here's the problem. That kind of thinking takes time. And time is something traditional education doesn't always allow. There's a schedule, a curriculum, a test at the end. So instead of exploring one idea deeply, you're pushed to move on. Topic after topic, chapter after chapter. And your brain adapts. It learns to skim the surface instead of diving deep. You become efficient, but shallow. And over time, that becomes your default mode of thinking. You might not even realize it's happening, but every now and then you'll feel it. That moment when someone asks a simple question, and you realize you don't actually know the answer. Not really. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can reach for a memorized response, or you can pause and think. Feynman chose to think. Even when it made him look unsure. Even when it slowed him down, because for him, understanding wasn't about being right. It was about being honest. Honest about what you know and what you don't. And that's a mindset that school rarely teaches. But here's the good news. It's not lost. You can rebuild it. It starts with something small. The next time you learn something new, don't just accept it. Play with it. Question it. Try to explain it in your own words. If it doesn't make sense, that's not failure. That's the beginning of understanding. In fact, confusion is a signal that your brain is doing real work, and the more you lean into that, the sharper your thinking becomes. You stop relying on memorized answers and start building your own mental models of the world. And once you do that, everything changes. You start seeing patterns where others see isolated facts. You connect ideas across different fields. You become less afraid of complex topics because you know how to break them down. You don't just learn faster, you learn deeper. And maybe most importantly, you regain something that education often takes away: genuine curiosity. That childlike urge to ask why again and again, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because the world is actually fascinating when you look at it closely. The way light travels, the way time behaves, the way time behaves, the way tiny particles can shape everything you see. None of it is simple, but all of it becomes more approachable when you stop pretending to understand and start actually trying to. That's the warning Feynman left behind. Not that education is useless, but that it can become dangerous if it replaces thinking with memorization. If it teaches you to sound smart instead of being curious. But the moment you realize that, you can take control again. You could choose to think differently. And once you do, you'll notice something strange. The world doesn't get simpler, it gets more interesting. So next time you hear an explanation that sounds complete, don't just accept it. Ask one more question, and then another, because understanding doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from never being satisfied with the first one. If this changed the way you think even a little, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments the last time you questioned something you thought you understood. And remember, the smartest person in the room isn't the one who knows the most. It's the one who's still curious enough to ask why.